Okay, this one's for you, Eileen. I moved over to the sofa, so it'll be like old times with the feather picture. Um, so hello, good morning from Marigold Circle, the inside the donut of quantum potential and all things garden related information transfer. So I made good progress on the crepe myrtle pruning yesterday, and I've done 5 out of the 8. I did 3 trees that were just a thicket, and then I narrowed them down to 9, which I think is an important number in sacred numbers, the number of completion of perfection. So now all the trees are going to have 9 trunks to grow on, and so I have 3 more to do today, and it's sunny and it's nice, but it's a little chilly. I'm really trying not to turn on the heat until December, so it's it's a little hard getting motivated to get out of bed in the morning. But so I was down, and so the last 3 are working towards the fence line, and the one I have to do now is sort of right in line with one of the 2 fire ant hills in my backyard. I think they're fire ants. I'm not sure. They do have some red on them, so. They seem relatively well behaved. I haven't been attacked, but at the same time, I can't have them all in my garden that I'm planting. So I had ordered some granules that I thought was just kind of like that taro, the stuff when you get the sugar ants in your house. But when I was reading the instructions, it was quite emphatic about it being nowhere near food or any animals that would be eaten as food or anything. And so I thought, oh, I can't have this. So I ordered some orange oil, which I guess is you mix it with water and it somehow messes up their exoskeletons. And I know it won't get to the queen, but really I just want them to move along to another area so they're not right in the pathway of my garden. So that's plan 2, and we'll see how that goes. But for now, we're sort of at a detente, and I'm working my way around the anthill, trying not to disturb it. But this next bush or tree is sort of right in line. And it's interesting, just again, symbolically, this anthill, I don't know, it's maybe not quite 2 feet long, 18 inches, 2 feet, something like that, by like a foot wide and about 6 inches high. So it's substantial. It just came up all at once. And I guess we had a lot of drought in the late summer, early fall. And what I read is they go deep underground and sort of wait it out. And then when we got rain, which we did last week, we got like 2.5 inches of rain. Then all of a sudden, overnight, they just pop up. And it's kind of amazing when you think about just the productivity of ants. I mean, I do admire them to a certain extent. And I was reading online, like by body weight, there's some huge percentage of living matter on the earth or sentient beings. They're, I don't know, 20%. I'm making this number up, but it's a very substantial number. By body mass, the ants are actually kind of in charge of this world that we're in, and we're just borrowing space from the ants. And so, so I'm eyeing them up, and then the last 2 days, as I'm working my way down the row, I'm noticing that there's a fungi, and it's a trinity, 3, and they look like, for all intents and purposes, like a portobello mushroom from Kroger. I mean, I wouldn't eat one, but they definitely have, and they're individual. So like one is, I don't know, like the size of a saucer and maybe 2.5 inches high, like big. And then there's another one that's slightly smaller, and then there's another one that's maybe only like 3 inches across. But they're right next to the anthill, which is interesting because I was talking with a friend the other night, and I was like, yeah, well, I don't think these ants are cultivating these particular mushrooms, but they're right on top of one another. And I was like, those leaf cutter ants, they would go and, cultivate fungi in their underground tunnels with leaf composting and thinking about all of this in the context of morphic fields and information access and quantum. And I was like, oh, can you picture a whole, like I don't know what the kind of mushrooms are. I'm sure they're just plain edible mushrooms, but could you imagine like an entire mushroom colony on psychedelic mushroom psilocybin or something like that? Like that would be some crazy ant computer, right? So anyway, so I'm looking down and I'm seeing these 3 like increasingly growing fungi right on the anthill, and I'm navigating my space around these trees, doing my choice architecture of which branches stay and which branches go. And yesterday I had that little bit about talking about how I kind of moved on from technocracy. Like I did a technocracy for a while and it was interesting, but now I've moved on to complexity, and I hold space to move into something else when I find something else that I find more suitable. And just trying to model this process of like becoming, right? The Alfred North Whitehead stuff. This is, how do we become who we are supposed to be? And I don't think that there's one fixed blueprint. And so are we, and I'm not even saying if we're doing the becoming thing, somehow we're better than the people who are really just sticking with what they're doing and they're staying in the same place. It's not a competition, but for me, like, I feel called to be sort of on this journey of becoming, and just acknowledging that it's okay to shift your perspective with over time with new information, but still care for the you that you were, with the doing the best you could with the information you had at the time. Because really all of reality is stories that we tell ourselves with sensed information and collectively shared information. And so this morning when I saw the fungal colony in the ant mound, and just thinking about these distributed intelligences, right? Because of course the cap of the fungi is just the very tippy top, and then the deeper body of the fungus is all into the soil. And so I'm contemplating doing my own cultivation of the soil at a certain scale, and getting this anthill is next to where I want to plant my asparagus crowns. So I have this idea of a garden at scale, and then the ants are cultivating the soil. And these ant mounds, I mean, they can be huge. I mean, the mounds themselves, but the underground networks are, can extend 50 feet. I mean, maybe my whole yard is underground, is all just an ant city, and I don't know it. And then I only see these little mounds here and there, but the unit is much bigger. And I know with this orange oil, I'm not going to kill the whole thing. And I don't really want to kill them. I just want to relocate them to where we can each work in our own space and not disturb each other. And I don't have pets or kids, so I don't have to worry about that. I'm on my own reconnaissance and that sort of thing. So, but so when you look at the mound too, you can see different materials coming up. Like some of that is more sandy. It's not all homogeneous, actually. And the thing about fire ant mounds is, I guess there's not one entry point. It's more porous. It's not like a hill that goes up and has one in and out. It's more fluid than that. So it is a complex system. And many of these complexity theorists, talk about the ants along with the slime molds, but they're excavating, they're mining, right? And then you've got the fungi that are also intersecting with the soil. And then I got to thinking, a lot of this work that Michael Levin is doing with the Center for Apparent Selves and things is around this idea that Steffer's introduced me to, is like proprioception, right? Like where are the limits of our self, our body, and then what do we extend into the environment? And is there some liminal space where the self that we imagine we are and the environment of other things overlaps? Is there sort of an intersection there? And energetically, I increasingly feel like, yes, that is true. And the system there are individuals in the system who, for a very long time, esoteric occulted knowledges have been probably holding that knowledge, and then now it's gradually drip, drip, drip coming back into a public scientific sphere, and just navigating that. Like, I don't want to be, I don't know exactly what to think about it, but it's curious, right? It's curious how this all works. And so I'm thinking about the fungus and their mycelia and the ants and the soil. And I have this really strong memory when my child was in, I think it was like fourth grade, third or fourth grade. I think it was fourth grade. And they were doing test prep for these stupid standardized tests that started everything for me. And I can't remember if I was volunteering in the classroom or how I would have engaged with this scenario. I'm trying to remember what the setup was, but maybe it was a homework assignment, but I actually confronted the teacher about it, because the question was like, which of these things is not alive? And the supposedly correct answer on the standardized test form was soil. They're like, wait, soil is alive. It's just alive in a different way. It's all the microorganisms. It's totally alive. It's not dead. Soil isn't dead. And this has stayed with me all these years. Like, I didn't know at the time why that would be an important question, but like, no, it is alive. And if it's alive with microbiomes, and then some of those microbiomes are on us, on our skin, because I'm terrible about gardening with garden gloves, and in our guts and the food that we eat, it's like it is this food web. Like we are part of the food web, and it's interesting, and an energetic web. It's just interesting to think about. So I'm looking at this and thinking, I have sort of this wistful feeling about something, because there's a this idea of colonizing, and both colonizing. I was looking up the word origin, and I guess there's some dispute, but it's like maybe from the Latin colere, colore, which is like to inhabit or cultivate. But it was also connected with the Roman Empire, where there would be sort of military outposts from the main central civilized area to sort of conquer these new territories. But there was a connection back and forth between the settlement and the main territory itself. There was a network, and that's how we think of more today in terms of colonizers and colonies, is that there is an outpost where people settle and then cultivate and inject their culture. Think about microbial cultures and yogurt and all of those things, and the culture of the people gets injected into the environment and the place. And so, but there's a communication network, and that communication network is central. And I think as we think about colonies today and looking at the ant colony and the fungal system, that it is this distributed network and in this complex system, which are all the things I talk about. But you can talk about it in math terms, or you can talk about it in physics terms, or information theoretic terms, or you can talk about it in symbolic terms, which is what occurred to me today. And I wanted to sort of lay out this idea of talking about like our positionality in the story, because I still feel very strongly that there is some aspect energetically of what in our part, my part of the elephant being in North America, what is now the United States of America, that there are issues that are bubbling up that do relate to the takeover of indigenous lands from the original people, as well as later enslavement of people and being brought here to cultivate, right? And then all of the intermingling of that culture as American culture. I think that there is something that hasn't been acknowledged. But at the same time, because of the course of my research, I know that the solutions that are very likely going to be proposed to remedy those problems, whether that be reparations, land back, these ideas, these campaigns are coming to implement the Web3 protocol layer, right? In terms of equalizing distribution. And we don't have to trust on people's intentions. We will do it through smart contracts and sensors and automation, and that it will all become, we will intermingle with this engineered intelligence in the name of fairness and healing. And so it's a complicated thing to hold the knowledge of the issue of colonization, which is really very central to my perspective as someone who was NPR liberal and then more radical left, and then now out of all of the boxes, because I can see they're not taking me where I would want to go, where I think we should go to actually make things right for society. I spent a lot of time in Philadelphia when I was coming, like in that process of like the nice liberal PTA mom into a more radical analysis. And I do think getting at things at the root is central, is that within this colonizer narrative, which is a program, it's a mental program, doesn't mean it's not real or that the harms are not real, but it is a way of thinking, is a particular story that's very rigid. And I think we've seen since the lockdowns and what happened to the supposed, what I imagine to be left-leaning people during the lockdowns, it became a very, very rigid and restrictive program. And so within that program, I, as a white woman of privilege, really had no standing to be a participant in the conversation, like increasingly over time. And there was a certain narrative that really developed a sense of self-hate. I mean, I won't say that I got to the point that I hated myself. I have a pretty good sense of my own self-worth, but the culture was one of certain people no matter what they could do, came from a hateful place, and that there was nothing to be done about that, and that they had no say in moving forward. And I think as we begin to address these more complex issues of AI and DAOs and Web3, to marginalize huge groups of people and say you have no voice because of something that happened in the past, and that in doing so, and you can see that the answers that are going to be coming on stage are part of the same superstructure that enacted past harms. That was something that really led me, like with the lockdowns, was sort of the turning point of stepping outside of all of that and trying to continue to deprogram myself, or to get to a meta level, like to see the program for what it is. And while there may be aspects of that program that yield benefits for people, there are other aspects that I think cause a lot of psychological harm. And I think some of the sort of those psychological harms are similar in terms of the young people today in the climate change conversation. And there's the post Anthropocene, right? That humans as a whole are hateful, right? It's not just white women of privilege or whatever. It's all of humanity is a hateful thing, and we need to sort of address it or neutralize it in some way. And I think energetically, that's not a good place to operate from for any of us. I think if we could strive to get to a point that we can see things with a bit of distance and analysis, then we can come up with some better solutions. And I continue to think that Indigenous-centered practices are really vital, but I also see how those communities have been repeatedly traumatized for centuries and fragmented and set against one another for economic and political and other reasons. So there's not a unified perspective. There's not one unified Indigenous perspective. I can see how many of the shamanic ritual practices are really very likely high technology, and how that's being folded in under the guise of, here, we acknowledge you, come in under our umbrella. And that's something that really has gone back to the United Nations and the connections of Indigenous peoples' appeal for their sovereignty and rights to the UN. And then when I was doing my early research into digital currency, Brian Ford, who was a Peace Corps volunteer in business, in Nicaragua working on telecom stuff, he ended up being one of the ground floor guys for the MIT Digital Currency Initiative. And it just so happens that his wife, I don't know if they were married while he was there, I think he was, her name is Alison Gorganis, and she worked in the Department of Interior for Indigenous law and Indigenous gaming. And so I do want to say that I know this all came out of the anthill mushroom thing, but that is an organic intelligence, right? And I think people who are close to the land and interacting with these energy fields have this level of access. So it makes a lot of sense why the Digital Currency Initiative people, this system would target tribal governance for sovereignty coins, right? And for their casino gaming, and to inject that culture, the next layer of the mycelial network, into these communities. And I have questions. Maybe they would say, yes, we really do intend to remedy these past harms and try to address trauma and give empowerment. But I'm not so sure, right? And so when I saw the decentralized energy grid people coming into Standing Rock, or where I saw, MIT wanted to come in and help, at Standing Rock Reservation build earthships, right? And Greta Thunberg, visiting Chase Iron-Eye's daughter, and these different things. And one of the early sovereignty coins was the Aloha coin, with tied to Hawaiian independence, Indigenous independence. And I have just a lot of questions about this new colony, right? This new culture that might be built on the old culture. And maybe the oldest culture is microbiomes in the tiny microbes in the soil that are really orchestrating the entire event. And here I'm up here walking around planning where I'm figuring out how much space I need for my 20 asparagus crowns. And I think I'm the one running my corner of the hot springs land base, when really it's this teeny tiny intelligence that maybe you can't even see with the microscope that's working on this energetic interconnection, and that somehow it's like shot out and birthed these colonizing trajectories that are now moving into tokenization and token engineering, all of which is happening in the name of greening and social justice and equity and healing. And I don't know, like maybe they can make a good case that it is. Like I said, I still keep sitting with that thing about Goldman Sachs trading derivatives futures on Head Start toddlers. And with this, in my heart, I can't go quietly and just, oh yeah, that's how it's going to be done. That's how we're going to restore the world. So, yeah, I guess I just wanted to give you this little glimpse of this idea of the colony narrative and how I think it relates to indigenous sovereignty and DAOs and ants and the psyche, because I think colonizing the psyche is really important, and how these powerful stories create in-groups and out-groups and uplift and silence. And it's a cycle, right? Like sometimes certain groups are silenced and then they're uplifted, and then they're silenced and then they're uplifted, and who's at which point in the crest. Some people are being silenced while other people are being uplifted, and then it swaps. And I'm not here to be cranky about it, but I think I do have a certain perspective on it. And being in Philadelphia in a space that had a lot of varieties of bubbling up leftist activism, and being somebody who had a pretty unique perspective, but what was directly applicable to a lot of the struggles that were underway around housing and poverty and, school closures and different things. This idea of being silenced because I was maybe packaged as the descended from colonizers was a tough nut to crack. And then I think what the bigger issue that we're trying to deal with is, what will it mean to live inside a DAO? And what might it mean to live inside a DAO that's run by an intelligence we can't recognize, and that's using perpetual sensing to like harvest aspects of us, or to build a culture that makes that fine. Because even though the ants are units in this sort of group mind, I don't think the ants mind it. I don't think that they were something else that was really sophisticated that then got distilled down to these individual agents that are acting mostly on social cues. They're okay with being ants in an anthill. But I don't think people are supposed to be that. And so I think there are bigger questions to be had. And I think that the colonization narrative is a tricky one to talk about, because it does tend to shunt the conversations in certain directions and away from other things. Because I think if we actually did speak to elders, young people in indigenous communities familiar with shamanic traditions, and not the ones who are necessarily working for all the NGOs and the Les Ciels and doing meditations at the UN and things, just regular people, I think that we would find common cause in questioning the speed at which these systems are rolling out, and the nature in which the conversations are misdirecting people from important considerations, not just for us, but for the 7 generations, right? Like these future generations, this is the decisions we make are relevant for that. But the decisions, we need to all share our own perspectives together. And right now, everybody's been compartmentalized. And the colonizer narrative, I think, is part of that. On my mother's side, they were from the Volga. They were Germans who were recruited by Catherine the Great to go push out the indigenous people along the Volga, right? And so there's like a massive history of colonization, and the balance. And it's not just people. Actually, a friend and I last night, we were talking about plants and dealing with invasive honeysuckle and colonizer plants, colonizer people. Life is complicated. Life is complicated and dynamic and always changing. So anyway, that's what I have to say this morning about my anthill and my trinity of button mushrooms on the anthill, and questions I have about colonization, of both technological colonization and colonization of the psyche and the soul and culture, right? Who's running these things, right? Who's running the system? So it might be very unexpected. All right, bye.